And there's not necessarily opposition to the Bond Act itself, but there have been different opinions on how it should be funded. Some think that New York should have oil and gas companies chip in, but that's not part of the current plan. So keep all of that in mind when you head to the polls in November. But switching gears now to a very different topic. New York has a law on the books from more than a century ago that was written to protect workers when they fall from tall heights. Now, I know that might not sound exciting, but it's actually kind of a big deal. But in the century or so since it was passed, it's been interpreted in ways that some have said led to abuse of the law. And that's led to calls for reform. For more on that, I spoke with Tom Stebbins, Executive Director of the Lawsuit Reform Alliance. Tom, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be with you.
So we're talking scaffold law reform, which is something kind of wonky that a lot of New Yorkers don't know about. So the scaffold law, well, let's start there. I'll have you explain it. What is the scaffold law as it is?
Yeah, well, first things first, it has nothing necessarily to do with scaffolds. Right. What it is a liability law. And it essentially says that if somebody gets injured on the job, it's the fault of the contractor and the property owner under almost any circumstances. And that's really problematic because our justice system is designed to find fault, right? Is designed to assign responsibility. But in New York, if just for construction, responsibility resides 100% with the property owner and the contractor. And this is above and beyond workers' comp. So we essentially assume wrongly that in any case that a contractor was negligent or a property owner was negligent. And so they collect both workers' comp and then a claim on top of that.
And where did this come from? I know the law's from 1885, I believe.
Yeah,
in that
1885,
range?
before we had workers' comp, right? And back then the law made sense. And when workers' comp started to expand across the country, most states got rid of their absolute liability law and replaced it with workers' compensation. Every state except New York. The last other state to have a law like the scaffold law was Illinois. They called it the Structural Work Act, and they got rid of it in 1999.
I was just
or 1996.
There you go. So at what point did it change from it makes sense in 1885 to this is something that, and well, let's first break down absolute liability, what that means for people, because they might not understand. So can you explain what that is? To me, absolute liability means almost literally whatever happens, this person is liable. Like there are very few exceptions.
Yeah, that's right. And I think one of the best examples that people understand the most is intoxication, right? So you would think that if a worker was intoxicated and had 3 drinks at lunch and then fell down at the job, that would be the responsibility of the worker. It is not in the state of New York because the alcohol didn't cause the injury. It only contributed to the injury.
I see.
And because of that, the contractor and the property owner are absolutely liable. And this is especially concerning now that we have legalized marijuana, and you could see a situation where somebody was intoxicated on marijuana, injured themselves or others, and yet the property owner and the contractor are liable.
So was the law changed over time to include that, or was that the reading of it in 1885 when it passed?
Yeah, that was the reading of it since then. And really what's happened lately, or by lately the last 30, 40 years, is attorneys have found it, right? They've realized they can go to court. They don't essentially have to prove negligence. They just have to prove that there was an injury, right? Which is pretty easy to do. And if you prove there was an injury, you get to collect. So that's why if anybody is ever watching any other station other than WMHT, which they shouldn't, but if they are, they will see a lot of attorney ads for contractor injuries because they are incredibly profitable for lawyers. And that's part of the reason that they've been propped up here in New York, is that the trial lawyer lobby, who Governor Cuomo once called the most powerful political force in Albany, they want this law. And they want this law because they can get a lot of money for not a lot of work and not having to prove negligence.
Well, yeah, how often do we see this used? Is it very frequent? There are some laws that we talk about that aren't used very often, but as you and I both know, you being from the Lawsuit Reform Alliance, New York is a very litigious state.
Yes.
How often do we see this taken advantage of?
Well, we are the most litigious state in the most litigious country in the world, and this drives the majority of our lawsuits. So in one year that we reviewed, I believe it was 18 of the top 30 lawsuits were all scaffold law related. So it is a massive source of litigation in our courts and a massive source of money for our attorneys. And we have more attorneys per capita than any other state in the nation.
Yes, we do. We have so many attorneys here.
You don't sound surprised to hear that.
No, not at all. I mean, New York City alone just has,
right.
It's basically filled with attorneys.
That's right. We have more per capita than any other state.
Right. So the scaffold law, I've read in the past some op-eds and articles about this, in that it can drive up construction costs and delay construction in some areas. How does that work? How does it drive up construction costs? And is this an impediment to new construction, like infrastructure improvements?
Yes, and yes. It drives up new construction costs, and it does that because of the liability that those companies have to pay out, or the state, right, or the Port Authority, or the MTA. All of those entities pay massively amounts more in liability or insurance, depending on how they're covered, because of the scaffold law. The School Construction Authority estimated one year that this cost them $240 million. Wow. $240 million in school construction costs. That's an astronomical number. And for that, one of the SCA people joked to me, they could bus all the kids to New Jersey and still save money, right? So it brings up the cost of whether we're trying to redo LaGuardia, build new schools, or critically for right now, affordable housing, right? Which is why the Habitat for Humanity and the Association for Affordable Housing are all on board for reform, because this drives up the cost of affordable housing. And by driving up the cost of affordable housing, it drives down the amount of affordable housing that we have available to us.
Now, does this just apply to public construction, or if I'm building a house and I hire a private crew, does this apply there too?
No, it applies to anything over a single-family home. So The legislature in 1986 decided this is not liability that homeowners should necessarily carry, right? And so they fixed it for homeowners. But what's good for the goose is good for the ganders. We should fix this law for multifamily homes and for infrastructure projects. We should just fix this law. It's an outdated anachronism that really needs to go away. And importantly, it doesn't improve safety. And when you think about the intoxicated example, you understand why, right? If somebody can be intoxicated and never held responsible for their own safety, you might have more people intoxicated and people being less responsible for their own safety. So there's been lots of data out there that's shown that this actually correlates with an increase in injuries. And so, the advocates for it, mostly the lawyers, say, we need this law for safety. Well, it's not improving safety at all. And they often say once a year, oh my gosh, we have so many injuries, ergo we need the scaffold law. Well, if it was working, we wouldn't be lamenting all these injuries. So they're really talking out both sides of their mouth with it.
So how would you like to see a change? Do you want to see a full repeal off the books? I think it's the labor law, section 240, 241.
Correct. Yep.
Do you want to see that fully repealed, or do you think it needs an amendment?
Well, critically, we do not want to adjust the safety part of the law at all.
Right.
It requires certain safety provisions. We support all of them. It's just the liability. And interestingly, the liability isn't even written in the law, right? It's how the courts have interpreted it over the years. And so you could argue that the absolute liability portion of it was never part of the legislative intent. And so we believe that that needs to be clarified. It needs to be clarified that we have what's called comparative negligence, or where we assign liability proportional to fault. How about that? And that's really the amendment we're going for, but not to interfere with any of the safety provisions.
So just to give people a behind-the-scenes look, you and I have talked about this several times, the scaffold law.
Yes.
So where is this in the legislature now? It seems like it's something that we've talked about for years. It doesn't seem to gain momentum. I think you're correct about the trial attorneys playing a part in that. So where is this in the legislature? Have there been inroads made?
Yeah, it's a perennial issue, and each year we talk about a different part of it, whether it's schools, whether it's affordable housing, whether it's critically MWBEs who cannot get insurance because no insurers want to actually write coverage in our state. And yet it continues to stall in the legislature, frankly, because of the influence of money on our legislature. And the trial lawyers have a lot of money. They put it into the pockets of many of our politicians, and the law stays the status quo.
Is there any way for that to change, do you think? Is there any way to convince lawmakers to go against the trial attorneys and maybe side with somebody else? And are the unions involved in this too? Because unions obviously have a lot of political power in Albany.
Yeah, so the unions are involved, and they've supported this law for a long time. Frankly, I think it's against their interests because of the rate that it causes injuries and because of the amount that it drives down union jobs, right? And if you raise the cost for contractors on the insurance, they may be more likely to move away from union jobs and go to non-union. So we hope that the unions could come around on this. We believe they should. It's long overdue. We need to put our state in line with the rest of the states, with the way the federal government does it. And if we do, we'll have more affordable housing, more MWBs, more school construction, better infrastructure. Whatever your issue is as a politician, as a citizen, it's likely that scaffold law will save some money for your issue.
It's a really interesting issue, and I know that it doesn't apply to everybody, and it's not everybody's situation, but when we talk about scaffold law, there are so many different parts to it, like from the money, from the safety, to the lobbying, and all of these different things that we've talked about today. So it's something that we have to keep an eye on, I think. It's one of these issues that's never going to get enough attention unless some more attention is paid to it by people like me, people like you.
Right, and it has gotten attention. I mean, we've had the majority of county legislatures pass resolutions saying they support it, right? But critically, county legislatures don't get money from lobbyists.
Right, exactly. That's the thing. All right, well, we will leave it there. Tom Stebbins from the Lawsuit Reform Alliance, thank you so much for talking through this. I appreciate it.
Great to be here, and in person.